And now, Chapter 17 of The Last Boy on Earth, Waking the Wizard. Brady dropped the transmission into drive and began their quest for a functioning ham radio transmitter. The road out of the city was fairly clear, but when they passed 6 Mile Falls on the outskirts of Bangor, they were in unexplored territory. These were new lands in many ways. They had anticipated that the drive to East Corinth would take no more than 40 minutes, but it soon became apparent that their estimate was far too generous. The roads in the country were littered with more debris and refuse than the city streets. The animals had also been using the roads as highways. They encountered an abundance of deer, some cattle, several crows and turkey vultures picking at the edges of wrecked cars and trucks, both in the ditch and against the trunks of trees. Brady wove the life-seeker through 3 automobile collisions, the wrinkled blackened hulks that used to be subcompacts, nearly filling the road and blocking their progress. Near Kanduskeg, an 18-wheeler had tipped over, its trailer rear pointing like an outstretched arm at the blue, cloud-laden sky. Kaylee and Brady had to get out and inspect the shoulder of the road before determining that it was safe to continue. But they nearly found their own vehicle in the ditch. After that close call, they realized that this simple trip could easily turn into their final journey. In the peopled past, such a journey was incidental, a common enough event, but in the nearly empty world, they could become stranded or injured without any medical help. They had an uneventful 5 miles, the clearest stretch of road they had encountered since leaving Bangor. It didn't last long. Ahead of them in the distance was the biggest bull moose that either of them had ever seen. Brady slowed the life-seeker down to a crawl until they were perhaps 500 feet from the massive animal. Kaylee reached for her .45 and withdrew it, releasing the safety. "Looks like moose meat for dinner," she said. They waited for the moose to move, but he had his hooves firmly planted where he stood. He wasn't going anywhere, and he seemed to have no fear of the life-seeker. Brady said, "We don't have time to slaughter it. We've got to keep moving. Besides, maybe there's another way," he said. Before Kaylee could respond, he opened the driver's door and stepped onto the asphalt, walking slowly toward the bull moose, who must have stood 8 feet at the shoulders and weighed 700 pounds or more. What was Brady doing? "Brady, no, they're dangerous," she called as quietly as she could from the life-seeker while still being heard. Brady didn't even look back at her, but he did raise his hand, motioning Kaylee to stay back. With every step he took toward the beast, her heart skipped a beat. About 2 yards from the creature, he stopped and put his hands in his pocket and looked upward to make contact with the towering creature. Then Brady began to speak. In turn, the moose cantered a little when he first heard Brady's words. Kaylee couldn't tell that he was speaking at the distance from which she observed, but if she had been able to hear, she would have been able to comprehend. The sounds that came from Brady's mouth weren't words in any sense a human could understand. For his part, Brady didn't realize that he was speaking anything but normal, everyday English. He wasn't. He was speaking a language very few humans had ever spoken, except for long-dead shamans and wise men from the prehistoric past, or perhaps from the Aborigines of Australia. "We seek to pass you and continue on our journey," he said. Kaylee heard the moose snort and whinny, but Brady heard, "Where are the people?" "The people are all dead, except for a few." "Dead? So many? A sickness?" The moose was shaken, his eyes wide. Such a strange turn of events. "The animals in the forest know this. We all know it. The world is changing for us. Dog packs are forming. Large beasts from the west and the north enter our forests. All is stirring. The world is being reborn." Brady shook his head in affirmation. "I believe it." The moose shuffled toward Brady, bringing his snout within inches of his face, snorting, and then the moose said, Your kind hunted my kind. Why should I let you pass? I should trample you to death, and that one." The moose waved its massive head toward Kaylee. "How many of my people have you ever spoken with?" Brady asked. The moose lowered his head and stepped a little closer to Brady. He didn't shift from his stance, not even an inch. "You, the first, and the only," answered the moose. "And if we befriend each other, we can't hurt each other. We could help each other, or we could leave each other alone." The moose turned its long mule-like snout down to within inches of Brady's head and began sniffing. His massive brown eye met Brady's, and there was a moment of understanding. "I'm Brady. I come from the city. I mean you and your kind no harm, ever, for as long as I live." "And her? Is she your mate?" the moose asked of Kaylee. "We're friends. We travel together." "I will trust you. If the world is changing, perhaps a truce between us is a good thing." The moose walked away from the road, ambled its knock-kneed way into the reeds, and departed, leaving Brady alone. When he got back into the Life-Seeker, Kaylee was wide-eyed and stunned. "What just happened?" "What, that? I asked him to move." "You what?" "I asked him to move. I mean, it was easier than shooting him and then having to move the body. That would have slowed us down." "Well, what did he say?" she asked. "He asked me if you were my mate," Brady said simply. Kaylee's face reddened, and she immediately replied, "And you said what?" "I told him we were just friends." "Good," she muttered. "Because that's all we are, friends," Brady quickly added. "Right," was her curt reply. "He thought you were too scrawny for me anyway. He told me I needed a big, strong female," Brady said, chuckling. "He could have killed you, you know," she said. "I know, but one of us had to make the first move, and I wanted it to be a friendly one." She crossed her arms and laughed. "Next time you're going to do something like that, let me know first." "Okay, but I might have to do a lot of things that you don't expect. We're not on the old ride at the amusement park anymore. That place closed down. We're out here on our own, and I'm kind of making it up as I go along. So stick with me. Sometimes I don't even know what I'm going to do until I do it." "Great," was her reply. From his vest pocket, the small voice of the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin added knowingly, "Being ignorant is not so much a shame as being unwilling to learn. This journey itself is a teacher. Pay attention to the lessons. There will be a quiz later." With that, Brady started the Life-Seeker and continued winding their way toward East Corinth, Maine. Pre-pandemic population 3,000. Post-virus population? Impossible to tell. They entered the town an hour later. Pulling off in the parking lot of the town's only pizza restaurant, they took their bearings. "It's down that road there, to the left," Kaylee indicated. "How far?" "I don't know, but all we need to do is look for a really tall antenna. It's going to be impossible to miss." They drove down the Exeter Road toward McGregor Hill. Less than 2 miles down it, they saw, towering in a field next to a stone house, a massive steel spire, the antenna. There was also a large outbuilding behind the house, as well as a few vehicles of different vintage and make in the yard and nearby field. "This place is a mess," Kaylee observed as they pulled into the driveway. "Yeah, I guess they forgot to mow the lawn," Brady Riley said. There, sitting on the mailbox, was Hugin. "What the... Brady, is that your Raven?" "I think so." "Yep, that's him," replied Brady simply. "How did he know where we were going?" "Maybe he just followed us. We weren't driving all that fast." Kaylee almost agreed, but Brady's assessment of the situation wasn't hers, and she knew better. As they approached the front door, Brady tapped Kaylee on the shoulder, handing her a gas mask. "Better safe than sorry," he said, already donning his own. "It might smell bad." "No thanks," Kaylee replied. "It doesn't even faze me anymore." Brady considered what she said, and not wanting her to think he was weak in any way, shape, or form, he quietly tucked the mask and hose back into its pack on his hip. They opened the door of the small 2-story stone house and entered. The front room was light and airy, and to their surprise, smelled fine. This wasn't a tomb. This was a safe house. Brady had developed a method of investigating any house he entered. He always made as much noise as he could in the off chance that someone was inside, and then he went straight to the cupboards and drawers in the kitchen, since food was his main concern. When that was done, he would check the garage or work shed for tools he might need. He never liked going into cellars or attics. He rarely checked bedrooms anymore. He might pass by and take a quick look through the doorway, but there was never anything in a bedroom of any interest to him. Most of them were like shrines with pictures of strangers on the wall, or posters of favorite bands or actors, but whose? They always had mirrors in them too, and Brady had grown unused to seeing his own face. This house was full of such family pictures as he had seen in 100 other homes, of children growing up from babies to adults, the same eyes looking out from ever-lengthening faces, the same smiles. "Brady!" called Kaylee from down the hallway. "Come quick!" He turned and ran. She was standing in the doorway of a bedroom. "It's a body," she said. "Wait a minute," Brady replied. He pushed past her and went to the bed, taking in a deep breath. "How come this place doesn't smell like death?" Kaylee pushed past Brady now and went directly to the body in the bed. She put her hand on the man's forehead. It was warm-ish. Nearly breathless, she said, "Brady, he's alive." From the Journal of Brady Smith. There he was, just lying in his bed. He didn't look like he was alive. In fact, his color was like ashes. And it didn't look like his chest was rising or falling, so I thought maybe Kaylee was just wishing. But when I told her I thought she was wrong, she made me put my hand on his head. It was cold and clammy, but not cold enough for death. Like an idiot, I tried to wake him up by saying, kind of loudly next to his ear, "Hey, mister, wake up!" But it didn't do any good. While I was busy looking stupid, Kaylee was busy figuring everything out. She does that better than I do most of the time. "He's in a diabetic coma," she said. "What? How do you know?" I asked, and she pointed out the bed table next to his bed, and there was a blood sugar monitor, a syringe, and a full bottle of insulin. There were also some glucose tablets and a journal. When she opened it, she figured out the problem. "He's failed to take his last insulin shot. His numbers are crazy high, too, especially in the last week. I think he's been lying like this for 2, maybe 3 days. I didn't think things looked good, and I have to admit I was a little more than eager to have a living ham radio operator on my hands than a dead one. Besides, how many people have I seen dead in their beds? I mean, it would be nice for a change to find a living person. But Kaylee's the bomb. You know what she did? She talked me through it, like I knew anything about what was happening. But I think she did it as kind of a checklist thing. She took his blood sugar meter and inserted a new lancet, a thing that punctures his skin so a drop of blood would form. And then she poked it in his arm, a tiny red bubble appeared, and the meter absorbed it, and in a few seconds, she knew. He's still high. If he's still high after 2 days in bed, that's bad, but maybe he hasn't been in a coma all that long. That's bad, isn't it? I said. A coma? Well, at least we know how to treat it, she replied. What do we do? I asked like an idiot. Easy. If he was low sugar, we'd have to find a way to get some carbohydrates into him, but since he's high, we just need to give him some insulin. That's it? Easy, I said, not knowing what the heck I was talking about. It's not so easy, she said. We don't want to give him too much. That could lead to insulin shock or low blood sugar. We need to give him just enough. Well, how much is just enough? I worried out loud, but Kaylee said, I'll give him half his normal dose and we'll check his blood sugar again in a little while. And that's what she did. I was amazed at how sure she was of herself, but I didn't say anything. Kaylee is the smartest, coolest person I've ever met. She knows all about this stuff. How? I don't know. She was a candy striper and her mother did work in the hospital, so go figure for yourself. She's got a way with things. She knows things without having to learn them. She just figures things out. I really admire her, especially now. We waited there, me on one side of the bed and Kaylee on the other, for an hour. She took his reading again and said he was improving. His blood sugar, she said, was still high, but lower than it had been. The minutes seemed like hours. Strange, really, that we didn't talk to each other much, like we didn't want to wake him when that was exactly what we were trying to do. I couldn't believe our luck. If this was Joe Belanger, president of the Rag Chewers Club, ham-based station owner and operator, then we'd stumbled onto the very best person who could help us contact Radio Ukraine and the other survivors. Looking at him, though, it made me wonder because he looked pretty bad. I'd say he was in his mid to late 70s, a guy who used to weigh a lot more than he did now, like a well-worn tire that had outworn its usefulness, but whose owner couldn't afford another Firestone. There was a walker and a cane next to his bed, and he had some pretty thick glasses on the sideboard. Plus, there must have been 15 different pill bottles there as well. This guy had a lot wrong with him, but thank God he wasn't dead yet. When he finally woke up, he was pretty surprised. Kaylee put her hand on his to calm him down because he was pretty excited to see us. He could barely find the words to say, but I think that was because he was thirsty. I flipped open my canteen and poured some Poland Spring into a small tumbler and brought it to his lips. He sipped it slowly, and as the moisture made its way down his throat, he found his voice. "Where in hell did you come from?" he asked in a gravelly voice. Don't get me wrong, he was pretty happy to see us, but I think he was more curious than anything else. Kaylee said, "I'm Kaylee. This is Brady. We came from Bangor. Can you tell me what other medications you're taking?" She was so on top of this. "Yeah, I take so many pills. I'm like a walking pharmacy. You name it, I take it." Then he grunted and said, "All of my meds are written on the back of the diary," he said, indicating the journal on the sideboard. "How did you two survive?" he asked as he raised himself up to a sitting position, searching for his glasses. I looked at Kaylee and she looked at me. There wasn't an easy answer to that question. Sometimes you can look back down the road of your life and see how you got from there to here, but you have no idea how it happened. Eventually, Kaylee said, "I survived because of my advanced intellect, and he survived," indicating me, "probably from dumb luck, I think." The old man looked at me and smiled, and then he asked what his numbers were, and Kaylee explained. "Did you take insulin before you fell into the coma?" "Coma? I wasn't in a coma. I was sleeping," he insisted. "No, you were definitely in a coma." He stopped and considered her words, and he wasn't pleased. Quietly, he said, "Damn it, I was in a coma, wasn't I? It's just that everything happened, I'm just postponing my own death. I'm low on insulin. When it runs out, I'm a dead man anyway. My diabetes is so out of control, it's pitiful. I guess that black cloud that keeps following me around is finally going to go into cloudburst." "How much insulin do you have?" asked Kaylee. About a 3-week supply, maybe, and I've had a hell of a time keeping it cool. Lucky for me, the cellar's a lot cooler than up here. Got a little igloo cooler down there I've been keeping it in. Stuff goes bad if it gets too warm." Kaylee shot me a look that told me the level of her concern. I was swift enough to understand the problem. Joe Belanger was a severe diabetic who relied on insulin to stay alive, and if that magic substance ran out, so did the days of his life. The scene was complete. 2 teenagers were ministering to an old ill man in his 70s who had fought a different dilemma than the pandemic that killed everyone else. Kaylee spoke with Brady quietly in Joe's kitchen while she made him something proper to eat. "If he runs out of insulin, he'll die, Brady. We don't have much time." "Well, how much?" "You heard him. A few weeks, unless we can get some more." Neither of them had a solution to the problem. It would have to wait until later, after Joe was better. They had concerns about contacting other people, but their main concern now was to help Joe. Even if they never contacted anyone else, they had him now. In a way, he was their shared responsibility. "I've got a question," Joe asked. "I mean, why me? How'd you know I was here?" We didn't know if you'd be alive or dead. Actually, we were looking for your world band transmitter." Joe nodded in comprehension. "You've been listening to Tatiana on Radio Ukraine, haven't you?" Brady and Kaylee both burst out the answer. "Yes, have you?" Well, of course you have. Now, isn't that great?" Their fever was short-lived. "Oh yeah, that's just dandy. I've been listening to her. It's about all I've been doing. Spending all day waiting to hear another human voice for 5 minutes a night. It's a hell of a way to live, but you take what you can get." Brady explained how they had found his name, how they had been living in the Bangor Public Library, how Kaylee had survived in the worst place on earth for weeks on end while being pursued by a monster who was trying to kill her. As he spoke, Joe listened intently, seriously considering every word from Brady's lips. "So you drove all the way from Bangor to find an old man dying in his bed, and you showed up just in time to save his life. I'd say that means I've got more work to do before I'm gone. Or should I say, we have work to do?" "Work?" asked Brady. "My receiver works just fine, but my transmitter's been giving me problems, and my generator only works for 5 to 10 minutes before kicking off. I don't know what the hell's wrong with it. Everything falls apart in the end. God hates me." Brady and Kaylee assessed the situation quickly and wordlessly. "Well, we need to make it work again. We can get another generator if we have to, even find another transmitter," said Brady. "There's the whole world we can scavenge and take from. I mean, we own everything now." Joe's bloodshot and tired eyes brightened for a moment of realization. Perhaps these two were sent to him for a reason. There was no way of knowing, but from somewhere within his heart and mind, Joe Belanger, mechanical engineer, master electrician, world traveler, and jack of all trades, was a necessary element in the new scheme of things. If these two had been sent to him, he wouldn't waste whatever time he had left. "You're right," Joe said, sitting up on the edge of the bed. "I'm hungry, too. You two got any food?" Kaylee smiled, and Joe smiled back at her as she brought in the tray with canned pudding, slices of apple, and a Diet Coke. In the coming weeks, she would manage every bit of food Joe put into his mouth. It was a beginning. Back in the darkness of a burned and blackened cinder that used to be his heart, Grendel sat brooding. In his great talent paw, he held an old photograph gingerly between claws. He had transformed, become stronger, able to wander the world and seek out the remaining few, but the ones he hunted were gone. He knew now that so long as even one human being survived, he couldn't rest. His fate was now clear. He would need to be a traveler, to hunt them down, to destroy them. All of them, all over the world. His massive body, larger now because of the augmentation caused by the merging of personalities and abilities, sat hunched like a small child, hovering over the body of a sick pet, crouching in his own emptiness. The photograph seemed to overwhelm him, consume him, and cause him to fall into a melancholy as deep as Tartarus. Like some ancient gargoyle on a tall cathedral, no one was there to witness his longing, held down fast by bonds of hatred. Was that regret whispering in his heart? Was it despair lingering on the edge of his personal and endless night? She was waiting for him to complete his task before he could rest, and the only thing that mattered any more was to complete the task they had started together. "Get down," Grendel shouted to the presence within him that held the photograph, longingly, and remembered the beautiful face it held. "Let me go," whispered the mind of the man within him from the depths of Grendel's prison. "No, back down," Grendel shouted. Fenris studied the new frightening form of his master. Why was he shouting, and to whom? End of chapter.